Welcome to Attachment Matters, a series of conversations between two moms who love to nerd out on the subject of attachment. We'll dive into what it is, what it isn't, what it relates to, what it can mean for parenting, and how it can help us explain the current state of things.
As mothers, both of us found ourselves entangled in the world of gender ideology, following very different routes to get here. What we share in common is how the attachment framework has helped us to untangle these threads and better understand and fulfill our responsibilities as mothers in both the beauty and the challenge of these times.
In this episode, we review the primal emotions of separation and how they'll impact how we show up in our relationships with our kids. We talk about the importance of cultivating good intentions in our children and how competing attachments can make it so hard to hang on to our children's hearts. We also tackle the challenge of navigating financial boundaries with adult children. And we each share a few thoughts and suggestions on the provocative topic of estrangement. Well, last time we were talking a lot about, I think, I remember you saying, oh, I was looking for the right verb, right? About how we cultivate the good intentions,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know, and we had thought we were going to get into boundaries, I think, and didn't get as far into that as we had hoped.
Yeah.
And so knew we needed to continue the conversation about alpha and get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds really, really good. I still can't remember the right verb or the right the Neufeld wording. There's something about, and maybe I'm saying it already, but it's like cultivating those good intentions. So you had shared in the last episode about that accountability meeting or dinner with your son,
Yeah.
where you and your husband had that weekly check-in time to make sure, as a teenager that you were touching base with him and he had forgotten.
Hmm.
And you spoke to how you shifted into more of a playful mode
Hmm.
and not making it about what he had done wrong or forgotten or the expectations he had not lived up to, but really about connection.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that at the you had spoken to how at the end of that dinner or meeting he had kind of taken it upon himself to clear his plates, to help clean up,
Hmm.
to and what I shared in that moment is that this wasn't a choice he was like consciously making per se,
Right.
but
Right.
that what Neufeld speaks to is that desire to be good for, that is an
Hmm.
attachment
Hmm.
instinct. It's a, we could call it an instinct, a drive, but that right relationship with you had been established.
Yeah.
So that desire, that longing to be good just flowed.
Yeah. I've used
So
that a
when we
few
talk about that,
times.
yeah, that
Yeah.
the cultivating of good intentions, and again, I don't have the exact
Hmm.
wording, but
Hmm.
that we're working the relationship. We're
Hmm.
working the relationship as a way to allow for the desire to be good to be expressed.
Mm. Yeah. I love that. And it goes hand in hand with, I think it's what's on the opposite end of that spectrum of counterwill, that
Right.
neither of those counterwill or those good intentions or that feeling moved to be good for are, and you pointed this out last time, intentional.
Right.
They are instinctual and
Right.
they are in response to uh, the attachment, I guess.
Yeah.
And okay, okay.
Yeah, because we
Hmm.
go back to that the first episode we did on the alpha, the
Hmm.
concept of alpha and the um, alpha independent, or the seeking and the providing. That when that relationship is working, vis-a-vis the parent and the child. And that's when I say child, it can also mean teenager, it can also mean adult child. Um, that when the one that who is in the seeking role,
Mm-hmm.
when their needs are being provided for,
Mm-hmm.
there is a natural outpouring of the desire to be good.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
there might have been something else there that I wanted to say that I lost track of, but it really is in that dance
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
where these things tend to flow. Now, is it that for some children, or teenagers, sometimes we are intentional. It's not to say that we're never intentional or that we're never willful, so it's not an either or.
Mm-hmm.
100% of the time it's instinct and it's never intentional. It's like certainly we do call upon intention and we have will. But I think our cultural understanding is very much skewed towards this behaviorist
Yes.
theory, this learning theory, this behaviorist model where
Mm-hmm.
that sculptor
Mm-hmm.
focus is
Mm-hmm.
much more that we're gonna sculpt out the behavior that we want, that it is intentional all the time and it needs to be shaped, um versus
Yeah.
the nature's design and how the relationship can facilitate.
Yeah. I think
um
it was Alfie Kohn. Sorry for
yeah.
interrupting.
No, yeah, yeah.
I- And I've said this recently. I can't remember if it was in one of these conversations, but I think it was Alfie Kohn, and you might know this. Um, Said behaviorism is inhumane. You heard that? Yeah.
I'm nodding over here.
Yeah.
I mean, I have come to see it that way.
Yeah, me
I
too.
definitely felt much more passionately. I came to a much more passionate sense of that when my sons were, the preschool age, because I think that's where some of this stuff I think really becomes very intense. The
Mm-hmm.
conflict
Mm-hmm.
of this paradigm with our relationship to our child,
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think really starts to come out very strongly
Mm-hmm.
around that preschool age.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, and I guess in that it's wounding
yeah,
potentially. Yeah.
shaming.
Yeah. So sculpting is really what we're talking about here, is kind of using uh, that behaviorist model, which would be essentially punishments and rewards
Yeah, and it's
to to shape behavior.
yeah,
Hmm.
and I think there's an implicit belief within that culturally that our behavior and our children's behavior is always willful, is always conscious,
Right.
is always
Yes.
intentional versus us being moved
Yes.
by these inner springs.
Yes, yes. And if that is your understanding of the behavior, then the behaviorist model makes sense, right?
Correct,
Then,
because you do need to take
hmm
action to correct things all the time.
hmm hmm And it's sort of that idea of blank slate, even,
Correct.
that there's nothing there to start with, and we are shaping it. And that is our job, is
Correct.
to
Every
shape.
second of every day.
Yes. Okay.
Teach a lesson.
Where this model, the attachment model, is more from that approach of the acorn, you know, and creating the right conditions for the acorn to do what it will do, right?
Right.
It is going to become this full grown living organism. It will mature into that, but if conditions aren't right, it'll get stunted or it won't reach its full potential.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Very well
But that
said.
but
Yeah.
that it is embedded in the organism to become that thing.
Yep. In the design. Yep.
Okay. Okay. I think that's important to revisit that and
Hmm.
remind people that those are the two different uh approaches,
Yeah.
and
Paradigms. Yeah.
yeah, paradigms. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Which is a
Hmm.
big deal. Yeah. And
Hmm.
requires a very different a reorientation if you're going to shift from one to the other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I did want to quickly say something about the will,
Mm.
that and the agency,
Hmm.
and that it's not all instinctual, you know. It- I think this is part of even the larger cultural conversation these days is where do we have free will?
Mm.
And I think this also comes up in those stories from last time where I was moved to do something else. Um, I I would say after having these conversations and learning more about this, I was in seeker mode, and I'm now talking about the story about my daughter not wanting to accompany us downtown, that put me into frustration and I needed something from her and I was not I had lost touch with the alpha role, I think, and so needing to use my will to shift that right into uh being in right relationship or in right attachment to my daughter who needs me to be the alpha. Does that
Yes.
does that fit? Okay.
100%. And that even takes me back to our first two conversations where we started really from a place of encouraging the parents listening to us to be aware of those primal separation emotions
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that can be sparked through hearing this content, looking at the
Yes.
mistakes we may have made or things we didn't understand in the past, and that we can then be moved in that pursuit, moved in the alarm, moved in the frustration, and just this idea of developing a relationship with that, trying to build our awareness about when we're being
Mm-hmm.
moved,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore being able to have some choice in what we
Yes.
do with it.
Yes.
Even if we can't, it's not about stopping it or making the emotion go away, but just being like, hey, ooh, boy, am I
Yeah.
frustrated.
Yeah.
Boy, I am alarmed.
Yeah.
So, you know, it kind of takes me back to that Neufeld, what he says about what we see, um, determines what we do.
Yes.
So whether
Yes.
it's what we see in our child, how they're being moved and the
Mm-hmm.
behavior they are acting out, how we see that is going to really determine how we move with them, towards them. Well, same with ourselves. It's like
Mm-hmm.
what we can see about our own emotions and how we're
Mm-hmm.
being moved is also going to determine how we act
Mm-hmm.
in those really intense moments too. And it can be so hard. And I feel like I'm a broken record when I say this because I know how hard it is. It's hard for me all the
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm so glad you brought that up. And we might need to spend another little bit of time there before moving on to what we had intended for this conversation, because I think that is really important, is what we see is
mhm.
going to determine what we do.
Yeah,
And so that I, I don't know if we can impress just how important that part is,
yeah,
you know. But you mentioned when the relationship is working,
yeah,
and so we're going to have a lot of moms right now thinking, oh, well, the relationship is not working because
yeah,
my child does not feel moved to be good for me or
yeah,
even to be nice to me,
yeah,
and so and maybe that is just part of today's conversation is to pay attention to what you are seeing
yeah,
when that happens
yeah,
and possibly some strategies for bringing that consciousness and choosing something else, finding your
yeah.
free will in that moment rather than just following your impulse to,
Yes. Ooh. It is
yeah,
just so hard because when those primal separation emotions, you know, are triggered, um, they are so strong that they even if we have the capacity for maturity, even
Mm-hmm.
if we have matured enough that most of the time we're operating with integrated function, we can see on the one hand, I love my child. And on
Mm-hmm.
the other hand, I'm so angry, I'm so upset, I'm so hurt.
Mm-hmm.
But they can be both at the same time, and therefore we can, I hate, in some ways, I hate this term, but regulate. We're
Yeah.
tempered. We have a mix,
Yeah.
and therefore we're going to not react explosively, you know, in the,
Mm-hmm.
in, but the reality is that there is this purity of emotion that comes with those separation based alarm, frustration, pursuit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the more intense that emotion is, the less likely we are going to be able to mix it with an
Mm-hmm.
on the other hand.
Okay.
So again, it's just an invitation for the parents or the mothers listening to this to say, if you find yourself in those moments where you are just so intense and it's easy, and trust me, I'm always asking myself, why can't I mix? Why can't I temper myself? Why
Mm-hmm.
can't, and the reason is because, the stronger those emotions, the more intense they are,
Mm-hmm.
the more deeply the sense of separation cuts into
Mm-hmm.
us,
Mm-hmm.
the harder it is, to have perspective in those moments.
Okay. Okay. I am wanting to map another framework, I think, over it, especially for like Stoic mom listeners, just
Mm-hmm,
because I think I use a bit different language,
mm-hmm,
and so I just want to confirm my understanding and then possibly apply the words that I might use in my community and just we'll see if it works. So when you say integrated function, as you were describing that, what I heard is the capacity for ambivalence, and I think we've talked about that is an indicator of maturity, right? Is that ability to hold two things. And so, okay. And then uh, kind of like being able to do that to me is bringing that consciousness, being able to see, you know, I'm feeling this and I can pause and check the truth of it even, or know that there's more going on here. It's more complex than this. So it's just bringing that pause and that consciousness, having the capacity to do that, you
mm-hmm,
know. Then you're talking about purity of emotion. And so I'm often talking about who's driving the bus,
mm-hmm,
and so that's kind of what I'm hearing is it that mature person who's integrated at the wheel or has the emotion taken the wheel and has swept you away. And that is
mm-hmm,
now what
mm-hmm,
is driving your behavior is the
mm-hmm,
emotion.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Okay. So that's that purity of emotion. And then you're talking
mm-hmm,
about the intensity of that emotion is going to determine even in the most mature person whether they're able to act in an integrated way in that moment. Okay. And for me, I think that where I go that with that, sorry, as kind of a Jungian practitioner is, oftentimes that means there's a lot going on in the unconscious that we
mm-hmm,
need, that we then need to potentially look at, do a little shadow work and kind of understand why that emotion can take the wheel in the way that it does, and that it's not, you know, that's such important information to
mm-hmm,
work with and that we can often get to the root of why so that that is less likely to happen, if that makes sense, or maybe we can reach that integrated function a little more quickly if we have done some of that shadow work. So I just wanted to,
mm-hmm.
yeah. Okay.
I will say for me in this, and then I do want to kind of take us back to the trajectory we were planning
Yes.
to go on today, but
Yes.
I will say for me as a kind of overthinker,
Mm-hmm.
I'm very intellectually, what would I say? I'm a very heady person,
Yeah.
but I also have very intense emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the Neufeld concept of, these primal emotions,
Mm-hmm.
the frustration, traffic circle, those to me were very freeing
Mm-hmm.
because they freed me from having to analyze the
Mm-hmm.
why.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave me a simple way of just saying something is not working for me right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm just going to say that from my perspective, that's where I try to keep it
Mm-hmm.
because I have overanalyzed myself to death in my past
Mm-hmm.
for the why.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I have found that it is more useful for me to just be able to recognize, you know,
Mm-hmm.
when I am frustrated, alarmed, or in pursuit. Oh, something, you know, there's something that is not working. There's something
Mm-hmm.
that this is where I am.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so I just wanted to share that as kind of a counterbalance
Mm-hmm.
um where I am for myself in this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that can, yeah, that's helpful for a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
for
Mm-hmm.
sure. I
Mm-hmm.
think some moms can find it harder than others, potentially for that reason, that there might be, and it's not necessarily about getting to the why, but just about processing through whatever that block is.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Um,
Can I?
and
Oh, God.
yeah, you
No,
go
no,
ahead.
I was going to take us in another direction. So,
I think it's time. Let's go in
okay.
another direction.
So I was going to just say a little earlier before we went into the, kind of what would I say, the, the retrospective on some of the themes we've already talked about, kind of
Mm-hmm.
revisiting
Mm-hmm.
them and looking at them again. Um, you were talking about speaking to the moms who are maybe hearing this right now and saying, oh, well, my relationship with my child is not working.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't
Mm-hmm.
looking to be good for me. They,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so I had this morning, knowing we were going to be talking today,
Mm-hmm.
I went back to the Wisdom of Dependence, that 22-minute video. I only got halfway through it, but it's every time I listen, it's like, this is just so dense. Within 2 minutes, there's, an entire podcast episode worth of material. But there was one statement that just stood out to me, and I wanted to share it um, in response to you speaking to that
Mm-hmm.
reaction might be happening for some of the moms listening or many of them listening.
Mm-hmm.
In that video, about halfway through, he asks a question. He says, who are your children seeking in order to get their needs for togetherness met?
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to put that out there for any listeners who are saying, my child is not moved to be good for me right now.
Mm-hmm.
So one of those, what you see, so it's like, how do you work through that situation? What are you to do in that situation? And one of the suggestions that I have in terms of helping us to see would be to ask yourself that question and observe your child.
Mm-hmm.
Who are they seeking? If they're not being good for you, you
Mm-hmm.
know, who are they trying to be good for?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because that is a attachment drive, right? That
Yeah.
you're speaking to.
Yeah.
So going back to that plant analogy that we went through and those roots,
Uh-huh.
who are they seeking to be in touch with, connected to with the senses? Who are they seeking to be the same as?
Uh-huh.
Who are they imitating? Who
Uh-huh.
are they seeking belonging with or feel loyalty to? Who are they seeking to feel that they matter to? Where are they seeking that significance? Who has their heart?
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe there's a psychological intimacy going on for them. Maybe not, depending on how deeply that attachment has developed for them, but just really going through those roots and trying to see if my child is not currently seeking this from me, where or who or what are they seeking it from?
Yeah, that's interesting. I had written down, and I know this came up in the last episode, competing attachments,
Yeah.
which is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So
So
we're
just
talking about,
food for
yeah,
thought. Yeah.
food. Yeah, certainly. Well,
Helping us to see.
helping us to see. And then what? Like when you pinpoint maybe what that is, what do you do with that information?
Yeah. 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 I'm thinking as you asked me that question, I'm like, that's a very
Hmm.
good question. I mean, I think the goal is to do the best you can to collect them back. You know,
Hmm.
to engage those same
And this is all about
layers as
relationship
best you
here.
can.
This is about cultivating good
Yeah.
intentions,
Yeah.
which can be hard to do if you are in those primal emotions that that sense of separation is going to create for
I
you.
know.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
so this is bringing me to a word that comes up a lot among families, and we've talked about it too. And I would definitely want us to get back to boundaries because I think that is
Yes. I do
that is
too.
incredibly important. But estrangement,
Yeah.
and there is a lot of fear around estrangement
Yeah.
right now. And I'm noticing people naming things estrangement, where which I think then increases
Mm.
that fear, and then that
Mm.
creates maybe some uh what's the word? Like a reverse of
Mm.
the seeker,
Oh
right,
yeah. Right,
provider
right, right.
attachment. Does that
Yeah,
make
I can see
sense?
that. Totally. Yep.
So it puts mom into seeker mode
Yep.
because she is because that's what she's seeing, right? When her young adult child is not spending enough time or not as connected to the family as they once were,
Mm-hmm.
primal emotions of separation, and then mom becomes the seeker,
Mm-hmm.
which can, I think, drive the kid further away because now there's that neediness, and
And the
and the
demands. It
kid,
can be also be
yeah,
demanding.
yeah, yes. And so
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to put that out there that
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think that, unfortunately, that is one of the buzzwords. And like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't talk to my adult daughter that much. And I could label it estrangement and make and
Mm. Mm.
create a lot of fear for myself in that.
Mm-hmm.
But I
Mm-hmm.
just don't, to me, that's not what I'm seeing, right?
Yeah.
When you talk about what are you seeing? What I'm seeing is my child is very engaged in her life right now. I'm very engaged in my life right now,
Mm.
and
Mm.
so we don't spend a lot of time connecting, but when we do, it's lovely,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
and there isn't any of that neediness in it,
Mm.
it's, I think maybe it's just that forever relationship. And so I'm
Mm.
not in alarm over the
Yeah.
separation.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I guess my point in that is encouraging parents to be careful of that because there
Yeah.
is so much talk about estrangement, and there's so much focus on estrangement,
Yeah.
that if things start, if that child is very involved in their life, that to be careful of what we're seeing,
Yeah.
how we are making meaning
Yeah.
of what we're experiencing.
Right. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. That's really important.
And maybe that's enough on that for now. And
Yeah.
we can
Yeah.
jump into the boundary conversation. and kind of, some things that I'm seeing and even recommending with my clients because I think we're in a whole new world,
Yeah.
and so I'm curious how some of this aligns with the wisdom of dependence, because
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes what I'm recommending, I don't think sounds like I am encouraging dependence.
Yeah. Well, lay it out there. I'm ready.
Okay. Well, and I think part of this has to do with just I'm struggling with the right word, the lifestyles, of today and families maybe with lots of resources where the kids have had lovely childhoods. They've not
Mm,
wanted for anything. They've traveled and they've done all the things and they've had access to the things and the expectation is that access continues into adulthood. Does that make sense?
mm,
And so there's really not a lot of motivation
mm-hmm,
to grow
mm-hmm,
up,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
because there hasn't been a sense of there's and I know we've talked about this too, and I've kind of in the background tried to see how these all relate to each other that I'm trying to remember how you've worded it before, but that push for independence because they feel
mm,
secure enough in the world. Does that make
right.
sense?
Yeah, like this, what I was hearing, re-listening to that video was the spirit of independence
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
flows out of those roots being solid and secure underneath the ground. So we don't see them, they're invisible to
Mm-hmm,
us. But
mm-hmm,
what we might notice is there is this spirit moving the child, see,
mm-hmm.
kind of freely or spontaneously being moved towards independence versus being pushed or forced into it. Um, you know,
And maybe independence, maybe that's the word we need to look at. Like, what does that
mm,
even mean? Right?
mm, mm-hmm,
Because I will say, like, my kids are very independent.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Okay.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And and I think some of that is because they didn't get everything they wanted,
mm-hmm.
that I had boundaries around what I was willing to provide for them. And it
Yeah.
wasn't that they were lacking anything they needed.
Mm-hmm,
Their needs
mm-hmm,
were being met, but
mm-hmm,
they
mm-hmm.
certainly didn't get everything they wanted.
Yeah.
And so there was some drive in them to have their own income,
Mm-hmm,
so that they could
mm-hmm,
spend their
mm-hmm.
money on what they wanted because they knew they weren't going to be spending my money on what they wanted. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so, um, and I think that in times past, that was typically the case. There were
Yeah.
limited resources, right? And so that did impact the lifestyle, the,
Mm,
you
mm-hmm,
know, and the expectations around the lifestyle.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
so that's where, like with young adult children, I find myself encouraging parents to get really clear on what feels okay for them to contribute to that young adult's life
Yeah.
that releases that kid from accountability to the
Yeah.
parent,
Yeah.
so that that's not the dynamic with your adult child.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I've been giving this a lot of thought because we kind of have talked about it off recording,
Mm-hmm.
right? And kind
Mm-hmm.
of the spaces in between our episodes. And yeah, in the context of kind of that wisdom of dependence perspective, I was thinking about this like if our young adult child, let's say, is seeking to get their togetherness needs met from peers or away at college or the internet, whatever the different attachments might be that are not necessarily having them seek them from us or that are competing with them seeking from us. And kind of it, the video was taking me back to that perspective of the alpha and seeker being this dynamic of the delivery of care. right? That this is nature's design for,
Mm-hmm.
let's say my parents to care for me, and then I can then care for my children, and
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
cascading care. So if we're in that, what I started to want, picture in my mind was, if the only care we are able to deliver is that financial care,
Mm-hmm.
but the heart, we don't have their hearts or their,
Mm-hmm.
seeking that attack, all those other primal relational needs somewhere else. I, I don't, and I wanted to say this right from the beginning of this conversation. I don't know that I have any answers here, but I do want
Mm-hmm.
to explore it and talk about it and try to see these different possibilities. And so one of the possibilities is that financial relationship becomes, like you're saying, more laden with a
Yeah.
leverage attached
Yeah.
to it.
Yes. Yes.
And I don't have the answer for what to do, but I
Mm-hmm.
can definitely see how that can be very difficult.
Mm-hmm. 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 Well, yeah, and I think it is the complication of that care being financial. As you said,
Right.
financial care is very different than emotional care, and there does seem to be automatically strings attached. If my
Right.
resources are going to something, I want to approve what those resources are going to. And I think that's a legitimate claim,
Yeah.
which is why I then
Yeah.
encourage putting a boundary around that
Yeah.
and letting that go,
Yeah.
right? Or deciding what you're okay paying for and just pay for that.
Yeah.
Because in real life, there are limited resources and people
Yeah.
have to figure it out.
Yeah.
You've got to that's what grown-ups do, right?
Yeah.
Is to make choices to, based on their values as to what their financial resources are going to go toward.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important life lesson to learn,
Yeah.
that it has little, that is independent even of this care we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
right? When we
Mm-hmm.
talk about the wisdom of dependence, I think that dependence is those emotional needs, like you said.
Right.
Yes.
Yes. Now is a generosity of providing for that, because I don't think you can't fully necessarily pull them apart, because
Hmm. I know.
the idea of providing is nurturance, it is care, and I think, I don't know the parents who you're working with, but I believe and I imagine that they are offering the financial support out of that
Yes.
desire to be
Yes.
close, that desire to provide.
Yes.
It is a good one, it's a good
Yes. Yes.
instinct,
I agree. Yes.
Um,
Hmm.
so, but I also do agree with you in saying that, um, it's almost, it can get a little twisted. It can get skewed, um, when those relational dynamics are off.
Yeah.
And then, that is the way you can stay connected, you know?
Yes. Yes. Well, yeah, yeah. And I think it gets complicated when that financial care is then resulting in feelings of resentment
That's huge.
because parents are paying for college or they've made this commitment out of what you're talking about, right? That impulse to provide care. And so they have made it possible for their child to go to college, and they have agreed to pay for these things. And then the child uses their resources to pursue affirmative procedures,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
forth. Right. And so then
Yeah.
born out of that is this resentment, and
Absolutely.
hmm hmm
And
hmm
this keeps on flashing in my mind, so I want to say it out loud. Maybe I've said it already. I'm going to say it again. It may not at all be for lack of the desire, the love the
Mm-hmm.
providing, the nurturing attempts from the parents to reach the
Mm-hmm.
child, you could be doing everything right.
Yep.
But if the adult child who is the one you want your care to land with, that you want them to receive your care,
Mm-hmm.
if they're not oriented towards you, or they're not, in that um they're not seeking you those emotional needs,
Mm-hmm.
from you, um there, it's almost like if you imagine a cup and your water is trying to pour into it, but the cup is like tilted in another direction,
We did talk about this, yes, and the one about cascading care. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
you know
Yes.
they're not going to receive it.
Yeah.
And I do think there is almost like a potential for this cynicism from, and I want to
Mm-hmm.
be very, like, cautious here, because of every conversation we've had about willfulness and intention versus the instincts that move
Mm-hmm.
us,
Mm-hmm.
and but I do think, um especially because of the cultural influences and the peer orientation and how that can meld with the ideology, whether it's gender ideology or like the social justice ideology, the woke ideology, you know, and you've spoken to this so often, is, all of those attachment systems, if your
Mm-hmm.
adult child is attaching
Mm-hmm.
to their peers, seeking togetherness and belonging through shared belief systems,
Mm-hmm.
all of that kind of stuff, they are being inundated with people saying bad things about parents,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
unless the parents are on board. And so, you know, there's so much room for that child to really kind of disregard the
Mm-hmm.
sacrifice that
Mm-hmm.
the parents are making.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's little that's my experience of their experience, the parents that I'm talking to, right? Is that uh no recognition, no gratitude, no appreciation for the sacrifice, like you're saying, which is going to
Mm-hmm.
then result in
Huge
resentment.
amount of resentment. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's almost like, again, the visual I'm getting is like, how how do you plant the seeds or attempt to create the conditions for the emotional connection,
And I think
even if it's even if it's minuscule, even if you're
yeah,
just scratching at the ground to crawl, like, I just, with pulling back from that,
yeah.
financial piece, I just, in order to try to shift that attachment dynamic,
Yes. Well, and I think, okay, so yeah, let's apply some of this attachment language. And I guess here's my thinking and see what you think
Mm-hmm.
about that. I think that boundary is really important. I think that's what an
Mm-hmm.
alpha would do,
Yeah.
right? Is to
Yeah.
recognize the resentment and to adjust that financial support
Mm-hmm.
to something that feels good for you.
Yeah.
And then
And
stick
yeah.
to that boundary and let the child know I'm doing this because I don't want you to be accountable to me. You
Yeah.
know, like
Yeah. Free and independent, baby.
that's right. That's right. I free you by putting this
Yes.
boundary
Yeah.
here so that I can feel good about what I'm giving you and we can have a different relationship and an
Yeah.
adult to adult relationship, really. Like, I
Yeah.
think it's okay to say that, a respectful adult to adult relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because so that then you can focus on that
Mm-hmm.
other emotional care, you know, and that connection,
Mm-hmm.
because otherwise that resentment pushes you further and further away.
Yeah. I can really see that happening.
So
Yeah.
to me, that is I do think it aligns,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, with the wisdom of dependence, even in that it's okay for your child to know that resources are limited, you know, that and I also love the generosity,
Yeah.
but when it becomes the expectation of the child that mom and dad are just going to meet not my needs, but my
Mhm.
every whim, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
Then the high likelihood of the resentment, of, and especially as you've said, if their cup is faced a different direction,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know, then that
Hmm.
is not going to feel good for mom and dad. And that is not going to be
Yeah.
good for the relationship.
No.
And you're not going to feel like an alpha. It's not going to feel like
Right.
generosity, you know.
No, it's more desperation.
Yes.
The thing that, or I see the potential for that
Yeah.
being a driver, you know.
Yeah.
Um, One thing I want to say that I would definitely encourage parents not to do is to tie the removal of financial support to the gender identity or,
Agreed.
you know,
Agreed.
um,
Mm-hmm.
because that, you know, so
Mm-hmm.
it's like there's a phrase called trying to get in front of it,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and even if your child is in their 20s, um, you know, there's still a lot of possibility for immaturity. You
Mm-hmm.
know, there's still a lot of, you know, yes, you're both adults in age,
Mm-hmm.
but you may not at all be at the same level of actual being grown up.
Right.
They could have grown older, they still might not
Yeah.
be grown up. So, you know, you can
It's
really,
impossible, really. I mean,
yeah,
yeah, there's
you
there's decades of
right,
experience difference
wisdom,
there.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
all of it.
Mm-hmm.
So you can um I think be as heartfelt, but
Mm-hmm.
also keep it simple. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
this is what we feel comfortable doing,
Mm-hmm.
and we're not going to do more.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there doesn't necessarily need to be a lot of justification or explanation. It's just, hey, we love you. This is what we're offering.
Yeah,
And
this is what feels good for us to contribute to your life.
yeah, yeah,
Yes, and we don't want you to feel accountable to us.
yeah, yeah.
I think is I think that explanation of we're freeing you,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So that we can have a different kind of relationship.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's the energy with it, but I think I would just say, depending on each parent-child relationship, people
Sure.
may find
Yeah.
success being that explicit or be unsuccessful being that explicit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, for some of these dynamics, it can be beneficial to be less direct or lay
Mm-hmm.
it out
Mm-hmm.
less,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know, explicitly versus
Everybody
letting
knows their own child
them
best.
kind
Yes,
of
for sure.
do the
Mm-hmm.
work. You know, that
Mm-hmm.
no is firm, it is
Mm-hmm.
clear,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not a negotiation that we actually have to justify. You know, in that alpha role, it's like, you know, I love you. This is what I'm willing to do, and we're I'm going to be here for you no matter what. You know,
Mm-hmm.
um, conveying that sense.
Yeah, yes. I'm going to be here for you no matter what
I
is
just made
tricky
a face
too,
like, oh
right?
boy.
I know,
What
because
did
the
I
kid
just
is
say?
going to
What
be
just
like,
came out
"What
of
do
my
you
mouth?
mean? Well, right." But that is what we're trying to convey, right? I'm going to be here for you no matter
Emotionally,
what.
yes,
Exactly. But I'm not
emotionally,
going to pay for all your messes,
yeah,
That's
yeah.
yes. And so, right. There might be some necessary communication to that end.
Every situation will be different. So
Uh-huh.
I'm not telling people
Yeah.
what to do either way, just knowing that you can keep that strategic side of things less explicit if that makes more
Feels
sense.
right. If that feels right in the dynamic.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yes.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Agreed. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's good to discuss this, I think, and see how it aligns with
Yeah.
the attachment model,
Hmm.
and kind of just recognizing the complications in today's world with those competing attachments and with the strings that seem to come attached to financial support.
Yeah.
and the way that binds you in that accountability
Yeah.
dynamic, which you're making a face again.
Yeah. It's just, what can I give out of a place of generosity?
Yes, yes,
And
yes,
that is not going to drag me into resentment because it's
yes,
also going to free you. We're talking about
yes,
freeing your adult child,
yes.
but you need to be freed of that resentment.
Absolutely. And that is the feedback I get from parents when they get this when they're able to make this happen, what they experience physiologically and
Yeah.
emotionally is a
Yeah.
huge weight lifted.
Yep.
It feels so much lighter. And it is that, and I'm going to bring us back to that non-attachment word, right? Because that is what is happening there.
Yeah.
You are no longer on the hook for
Yeah.
those things. You give that to your child, and that's
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
right? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And this doesn't mean that if they've run out of resources and you feel like you want to support them to get on their feet again, that you can't do that. But from that place of generosity, not from that place of, I think, expectation and accountability. It's got to come from that
Yeah.
generosity place in you, which we've talked about before
Yeah.
too. It's coming from inside, not from uh, an expectation of what you're going to get in return.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly.
And I think that this was such an important
Yeah.
conversation. So, okay, how do we wrap here? Did we hit everything? And maybe it's too much, but cup is turned away,
Mm.
right? How do parents wh- what can parents do? What is
Yeah.
in the agency of the parent when the situation is that they are seeking their needs for togetherness elsewhere? Um, what can parents do?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I hear that question. I'm just like, I don't know. I just, um,
Well, it
yeah.
in some ways, this is at least normal in today's world. Maybe things were different when we were more family oriented, but that's not the reality right now,
Yeah.
you know? And I think it's okay to grieve that,
Yeah.
to feel that sadness that
Mm-hmm.
that's the world we raised our kids in,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And then I'm thinking of the frustration traffic circle, right? We've got to find a way
Mm-hmm.
to adapt to that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because if we can accept that, then those creative channels can open up again, and you might find ways to start changing that dynamic.
Yeah.
If you can let go of the anger and resentment that you might feel toward your child over
Mm.
this,
Mm.
who, again, like if we're talking about the instincts, they have little conscious awareness,
Yeah.
if any,
Yeah.
that this is what they're doing. They're not doing
Yeah.
this to you. They are being moved by cultural forces
Yeah.
that they have they can't resist,
Yeah.
and so having some grace for
Yes.
that.
Huge. Huge. And I know we had talked about, the possibility of me sharing some of my story, and it I think it'll just be something that I continue to do over time, but I
Hmm.
often think about my college years. And this is
Hmm.
especially when we get into the conversation around young adults, as a mother, I'm just not there yet with my own children. So
Hmm.
sometimes I feel like I'm just on this shaky ground, like I don't know how to talk about this. But when I think about my own young adulthood,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
again, even though I wasn't trans identified, from an ideological perspective, my cup was tipped away from
Hmm.
my parents, or, in a somewhat,
Hmm.
I feel like I was captured. My attachment instincts were captured
Hmm.
in a way that is parallel to what a lot of the adult children of the parents listening to this may also be captured. I think so when I think about my own 20s, my own college years, I just, you know, which I do all the time in the past few years,
Mm-hmm.
because I do think that was a time where I was very pulled away. I was
Mm-hmm.
physically separated because I
Mm-hmm.
left home to go to college,
Mm-hmm.
and I was most certainly ideologically separated.
Mm-hmm.
I was having all these new experiences, and I was in, sort of that very activist, that's kind of the world that I sought out at
Mm-hmm.
college, for
Mm-hmm.
my own, probably myriad of reasons. Um, but I guess what I just want to say, for some reason, I feel moved to say to parents right now that even though there were those competing attachments and I was far away, um, and being pulled into and away from my parents, my deepest yearning was to be close to my parents. My
Mm-hmm.
deepest yearning was to
Mm-hmm.
go home. My deepest yearning was for my family. And there was a time in which I wanted, like when I was graduating from college, or even before I graduated, my mom came out to visit, and it was around the time of like the battle in Seattle, WTO protests, and the World Bank IMF protests. I took her to these different events with me, like I wanted to share that world with my
Mm-hmm.
parents.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and maybe not
Mm-hmm.
all of your children do, but I guess I just want to remind those who are listening that even if it's impossible for you to see, inside of your children, there's
Yeah.
still that yearning. They
Yeah.
still, whether or not they are connected to it in the here and now,
Yeah.
I just have to say, from my own experience, it's still there, you know.
Yeah, yearning is an interesting word. And I'm thinking of my own, and I did this too, and gave me this helped me tremendously to think about my own young adulthood
Mm-hmm.
and how caught up in my own life I was, you know. And I wouldn't say I yearned for my family. I
Mm-hmm.
just trusted. They were always there,
Mm.
and I enjoyed
Mm-hmm.
going to spend time with them when I could. And
Mm-hmm.
I did want to share things with them. I do remember experiencing that
Mm-hmm.
and would also go long periods of time without without thinking about them,
Yeah.
and nobody panicked over that. You know what I
Right.
mean? Um, yeah, like it just wasn't a thing. And
Mm.
part of that is probably because I had so many siblings. My parents had a lot
Right.
going on.
They
They
had their
didn't
hands
have the
full. Yeah.
capacity, right, for that. But I'm in so many ways I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
They were there for me if I needed them. I knew that. Not
Yeah.
financially because they didn't have the resources.
Yeah.
I could always go home, but they certainly
Mm-hmm.
weren't going to be able to support me financially. I had to figure it
Right.
out. Right.
Right.
Um, but it was the forever relationship. It's like I can
Yeah.
be separate from you
Yeah.
and it's okay
Yeah.
because you're still there.
You could take it for granted.
Yes, you could take it for granted.
Yeah.
And I think that too is a cultural thing that we are dealing with right now, and again, with all the talk of estrangement, if
Mm.
it's too quiet for too long, we label it, right? Uh-oh, this is estrangement,
Mm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's, I think, paying attention to what you're looking for,
Mm-hmm.
trying to find some faith in those family bonds that you created early on, and recognizing that young adults get caught up in their lives.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to mean something,
Mm-hmm.
And I do sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
I know, and this might be something for another day where
Mm-hmm.
where the kids are making it explicit, right? That this is what they're
Yeah.
doing. They're
Yeah.
cutting parents out. And so we'd have to tackle that another day. If that is not the case,
Mm-hmm.
I would say have some faith. Try to,
Yeah.
I would encourage that.
Yep.
What do you need to do to find some faith?
Yeah.
and just allow this exploration. Because that's something else I know about myself. Maybe not everybody, but again, in today's world, kids often take off,
Yeah.
you know, in young adulthood.
Yeah.
And and that's part of growing up too. You
Yeah.
know, we used to have rites of passage
Right.
and it was figuring out how to be in the world without your parents
Yeah.
sometimes. And so I do think there is some natural impulse in that too.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so
I
yeah.
like how you said having that faith and giving that time and space. And it does feel to me like an alpha position to take where you're, again, not grasping,
Hmm.
but providing that generous invitation and, you know, sending some text messages. We in one of the Q&A episodes, we talked a lot about being playful,
Hmm.
coming alongside,
Yes. Yes.
what is an interest you share in common or an interest of your adult child's that maybe you don't like, but
Hmm.
you can find interest in order to have a connection to them. Um, you know, just working that
Yeah.
working that connection in a light
Yeah.
or humorous or even sharing music.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and I just have to say, I continue to see not only my relationship to my parents evolve and all the healing that we have experienced in my 40s,
Hmm.
okay,
Hmm.
but also some of my siblings, my younger
Hmm.
brother. I just spoke with my parents, and him and his young daughter had taken a long car ride with them recently, and he has gone through many difficult times with my parents. And they did that. They put on Spotify, and he was the DJ, and they just the four of them did like
Hmm.
round robin after round robin, choosing different songs
Hmm.
to play and enjoying music together in the car. And he's also in his early 40s, and there were long periods of time in which it wasn't estrangement in terms of like I'm cutting you out, but certainly
Right.
emotional estrangement.
Yes.
And I just want to say that is,
Yes.
if parents are experiencing that and using that word, that is real. I had that type of estrangement from my parents.
Hmm.
Even though we were still in contact, there was a separation emotionally and
Hmm.
psychologically. So,
Hmm.
um, you know, yeah, just know that we're talking about a forever relationship.
Yes. Yes.
And, you know, having that faith, continuing to provide those touches of connection, significance,
Yeah.
sameness, play, you know,
Yeah.
keeps you there even if it's in the background.
Yeah. And I'm thinking too, maybe when we think of estrangement, we can also think of, and you hit on it, I think, there with being in that alpha role. The
Mm,
child might estrange themselves. That doesn't mean
yeah,
that you have to,
correct. Oh,
right?
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I
That it
could not
doesn't,
agree more.
yeah. They can do what they're going to do emotionally, and you can do what you're going to do, and you can continue to hold that space and hold that forever relationship, and
Yes.
know that many estrangements, I don't have any numbers here, are temporary
Yeah.
as your child is growing up
Yeah.
and coming to the wisdom of how important family is. That might
Yeah.
not be available to them right now.
Right.
They're likely to get there if we can continue to hold that forever relationship and that
Yeah.
generous invitation for them.
Yep.
Okay.
Well done.
Is that a wrap?
Yeah, that's a wrap. Thanks, everybody. I feel so much in my heart this episode. I really do. I feel like I've been kind of on
Yeah.
the verge of tears for a lot of this conversation. And
Mm-hmm.
just because it
Mm-hmm.
is so personal, it's personal to all of
Mm-hmm.
us,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
So thank you all for being here with us.
Thank you for listening. We hope you take something of value from our conversation today. Please check out the show notes for additional resources, including a prompt for reflection. We welcome your feedback in the comments and hope you join us for the next episode of Attachment Matters.